Have you found yourself in a situation where you feel like life and business have gotten too complicated? For whatever reason, you feel overwhelmed. You feel like things are too complex. You look at the way you're working and you question a lot of aspects of it. If you're in a situation like that, today's podcast is really going to benefit you. And hopefully I'll keep this short and sweet, but this is a soapbox of mine that I've been on for a little while with a lot of my clients recently, because I've found that as clients are growing, they tend to complicate their business. So we all tend to start off very simple. When you first start off, a lot of times you don't have processes. So you start implementing them one at a time, and you start with a handful of steps most of the time. And then next thing you know, you wake up one day and everything is just very complicated. You've got 19 steps to do anything. There's often multiple people in your organization that are involved to do anything. It just becomes overwhelming. I'll give you a simple example of this. And this is probably one of the most common examples that I have seen in businesses. And it's happened to me. And it happens to me probably about every 3 to 5 years. Email management is one of those things that plagues a lot of business owners. What I've found is as you are growing, you start getting more emails. There's more things you want to keep track of. The easiest way to complicate your email is to start adding folders inside of your email. Now you've got this long list of folders of things, and you're like, which folders? Is it in the client folder? Is it in the prospect folder? Is it in the this phase of the pipeline folder? Is it in the proposal folder? Like, where is this thing that I'm looking for, right? And you wind up with all of these folders. Again, I go through this myself. And so about every 3 to 5 years, I'll sit back and I'll look at my email and say, why are there so many folders in my email? For some reason, I've added some extra folders in here that I don't need. I always wind up consolidating those down, and I can get it down to somewhere between 7 and 9 folders. And that covers every possible topic that I could ever need to track and look at. Search is so good inside of your email programs that you don't need 9 folders. You could probably get away with 1 saved folder besides your inbox. I like having something besides just my inbox because I hate looking at a full inbox of all kinds of stuff. And so if you're trying to break this up, you probably only need a handful of folders, but people will wind up with 30, 40, 50 folders of stuff. And now it becomes a task just to look through the folders to figure out where stuff is. It's gotten too complicated. This spills over into every area of the business. It just becomes very unnecessary. What I've found is there are a handful of areas in the business that are very commonly overcomplicated. Prospecting is one, proposals, contract management, and then just everyday routine tasks. These things just get very, very complicated simply because we think the complexity will simplify things, and it doesn't. It just makes it more complicated. When it comes to prospecting, for example, that's one of those things where I'll see people's pipelines and I'm like, why do you have 19 stages in your pipeline? Oh, well, there's that many stages to the process. I sort of understand that, but is there really? Or is there really about 4 or 5 stages, maybe 7 stages to your pipeline? And they say, well, there's 19 stages. Okay, well, let's look at your pipeline. We pull up the pipeline, and out of the 19 stages, like there's only stuff in 4 of the stages. So you're telling me the other 15 stages, you don't have stuff in them right now just because you don't have enough opportunities? Like, why do you have 15 stages with nothing in them? And a lot of times people can't answer that. And it's because you're not using them. They're not part of the process. You're not tracking that. You're not actually using it for anything productive. So let's shrink down your pipeline. Let's get it to a point where you can use it. And what I've found is when you simplify and you force yourself to take a process like this, like your prospecting, and you take it from 19 stages to 3 or 4, and you start using those, then you'll determine, oh, you know what? We really did need this one other stage or these 2 other stages. And now you add those back and you're using the 5 or 6 or whatever stages it is. And it's more efficient because you've whittled it down, you've realized what you needed, and then you slowly expanded it instead of saying, what's everything we could possibly need let's just throw the kitchen sink in here. Let's just make it really complicated on ourselves. The other thing here about this is when you are complicating things by adding everything, the clutter alone creates some level of chaos. So think about it for this simple example here. If you walked into a kitchen and there was stuff everywhere in the kitchen, and you opened cabinets and there's stuff everywhere in the cabinets, and you walked in the pantry and there's stuff everywhere in the pantry, the first thing you're going to feel is overwhelm. That's the first thing you're going to feel. Now, walk into another kitchen and there's almost nothing on the countertops. There's the stuff in the cabinets, in the pantry. It's the bare minimum that you need. You're going to feel a sense of order. And that sense of order makes it to where like you feel like you've got some control back. Like, oh, I've got some control back. And I don't have to think as much because I have what I need. I don't have all this excess stuff that I'm looking at. And that excess stuff is data, whether you realize it or not, because your brain is like a computer. The excess stuff is data that your brain is processing. So for example, in the kitchen side, if you go into the kitchen and there's stacks and stacks of stuff on the counter, you open the pantry, there's stacks and stacks of stuff in there that you don't need. Your brain is processing those things, even though you went to the pantry to look for rice, even though you went to a cupboard or somewhere on the counter to look for a pan or whatever it may be. Your brain is still processing all of the excess stuff. It can't help it. Your eyeballs see it. Your brain has to process it, and it's slowing you down. Apply that to your prospecting and your pipeline. Even though you don't have opportunities in 15 of your 19 stages, your brain is still processing the stages. Your brain is still seeing them and wondering, why don't you have things in here? Until a point where you gloss over it and you don't see it anymore, because there is a blindness that you will get at some point, but your brain can still see it. I've seen some people even get to that point where they see it, and every time they look and there's nothing in those stages, they get a little bit depressed. They're like, why am I not doing this right? Why don't I have things in here? It's because you don't need them, but now your brain is processing this depression because it sees all this clutter. Clutter creates chaos. Chaos is not good for your everyday habits in your business. If you're struggling to win government contracts, the answer is not quitting. The answer is finding the right information you need and the right mentors you need. And I've got a quick solution for you. The quick solution is a book that I just wrote. It's called I'm New to Government Contracting, Where Do I Start? It's a great book that walks you through all of the fundamentals that you need. So if you're struggling with getting contracting officers to call you back, getting teaming partners to call you back, if you're struggling with bidding and losing all the time, if you're struggling with the proposal process, if you're struggling with anything in this business, this book covers it. It's going to walk you through A to Z, everything you really need to know about government contracting, and give you not only the foundational education you need, it's going to give you a lot of advanced tactics and strategies that most people don't teach. And it's all in that book. You can go grab it right now on Amazon. Now back to this episode. I want to talk about 4 really simple principles for simplification. The first one should be the most obvious. It's identify pain points. Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt in your business? Whether it is physical, emotional, mental, however you want to look at it, because sometimes there's a process that allows you to run yourself ragged, where you're letting the process run you instead of you running the process. And so you're spending extra hours in the day updating things you don't need to be updating or working on things you don't need to be working on, spending that mental energy. And so you're physically and mentally exhausted from it. And some things are just taxing on your soul, if that's the way to put it, where you're dealing with a process and there's just no reason to do it. Identify the pain points. I'll give you one from a nonprofit that I worked with several years ago. We had this nonprofit in Illinois that I worked with that took physical donations from the community. So think about, housewares, bedding, clothing, all that kind of stuff. We would take in anywhere from 100 to 150 bags of clothing a day at this place. Like, it was an insane amount of donations coming in. And there was a donation dock. There was a garage door that would pop up, and people would have to take the donations through the building and into the back. So we stopped letting customers do it. We're like, hey, only staff is going to do this, right? It was still a problem because we had to leave space in the store to get stuff all the way to the back, which meant you couldn't utilize the floor space as well as you should be. they were bumping into customers. Customers would complain about it. It was hot in the store in the summer. It was cold in the winter because that garage door had to be up. It was a lot of different issues. And one day I happened to see next to the garage door that this used to be like it's next to a train depot. So it has like these big sliding doors, almost like barn doors. And one day I was like, I bet those aren't for decoration. I bet there's a door behind that. Because the clothing was stacked almost to the ceiling inside in that room, you couldn't see that there was a door. So we moved clothing and we're like, sure enough, there's a hole here and it's next to the donation dock and it's in the room we store the clothes. So why don't we just open this door? And we had to take some insulation and some things out because they had sealed it off where you couldn't use these doors anymore. We took that off. We moved the clothing around. We slid the barn door open and we're like, okay, from now on, we're taking donations through that directly in the donation area. Like, why haven't we done this before? And we did that for a really long time. And then I'll talk about how we changed the process later. But it was one of those aha or duh moments where it's like, why are we going all the way through the store to do this? Well, the reason is because when we started off, we weren't getting 150 to 200 bags of clothes a day. We weren't getting 100 to 300 boxes of housewares a day. We were getting a handful. The store, it didn't matter how much space we had in there because we weren't getting that many customers. But as we grew, we needed the floor space for sales. As we grew, we got more donations. As we grew, life got more complicated. And the original process that we started with no longer served the organization. So it needed a change. It was very, very painful, but nobody wanted to change it. And it's one of the things we did. So identify your pain points like that in your business. Where is it? Is it your pipeline? Is it your proposal process? I guarantee you have obvious pain points that everyone complains about. Those are probably the places you need to start. I would sit with a whiteboard and come up with a list. What does everybody complain about the most? Once I have my list, I would rank the list and I'd start with the top 2 or 3, create a process or remove a process or change a process that's going to simplify those pain points and make them better. Now, the other thing when you're identifying pain points is a lot of times you don't have a process. So you have to create one where one doesn't exist and where it would be helpful. So you have to think about that. Where is an area that doesn't have a process that needs one? And that's what we have to do when we're going into that whiteboarding whole process there. You're correcting processes and you're creating processes in that first step where you identify the pain points. The next thing here is to question processes. I can't tell you enough of how important it is to question processes. Just because that's the way we've always done it is not a good answer when you look at a process. It could be stupid, right? And you have to look at it and say, this may have served the organization once, but it doesn't anymore. Or, hey, when we put this process in place, I don't know why the person that did it the way they did, but this is stupid. And we've got to make a change to it. It just doesn't make sense to do this anymore. So you've got to question processes. Why do you have so many steps in a process? That's a good question to ask. Can you automate a process? There's so many tools today that there's no reason why you can't automate certain processes. There are companies that I've worked with that are using archaic software that doesn't integrate in with anything. And they're like, well, all our accounting's in this system or all our whatever's in this system and we can't move. There was this one client I worked with back in 2010, 2011-ish timeframe. They were using this platform. And if you're an accountant, you may have heard of this, you may not. The platform was called the AS400. I think the last software update for the AS400 was like in 1983 or something. And this was 2010, 2012. And this company was still using that to manage their finances, to manage their customers. I'm like, we could do this better in a spreadsheet. Why are we doing this? To my knowledge at that time, because I talked to the administrator was like, he was almost 75 years old. And he's like, I think there's only 3 guys in the whole world that still even run these. And I'm one of them. I know the other 2 and then a year later, that other guy died, so there's only 2 people in the world who even knew how to run the system or make updates to it. It was the worst system in the world to get into. It was DOS based. So you had to log in through like a command prompt or something. I don't know. It was horrible to deal with. Yet that's what they were still doing because that's what the guy knew. I'm like, why can't we replace this? Oh, well, the person who's administering it, well, they don't know how to do anything else, and it's going to create a lot of chaos for them. Oh, well, what about the other 50 people in the company? It wasn't a consideration for them. It was just a consideration for like the one or two people that used it regularly. And so it created a lot of problems. So there could be situations in your business where you are using something that you can't automate because somebody's uncomfortable about moving to that new platform, that new whatever it is. And it's really just a training issue. But what if it saves 40 hours a week for several employees? What if it shaves off 10 hours a week for 10 employees? What if it makes your life easier because now you've got things automated and they are publishing information to other areas of the business and things like that? And they're doing it in your sleep, right? What if it does that? So if you can automate something, that is a huge help to the business. The next one on this list around questioning processes is looking to say, are we duplicating processes? Are we duplicating processes or tasks? I see this all the time where there's multiple areas that are being duplicated. And I say, why do you have three people answering the same question? You've got three people doing research and they're all coming together with the research. You don't have a system for your research. What if one person was in charge of research and you knew the 5 questions they needed to ask every single time? How could you make this easier? One of my pet peeves in any sort of business, but especially doctor's offices, is when I go into the doctor's office and they want me to first, when you do the intake, they have 19 forms you've got to fill out. And every single form wants you to put your name, your birthday, and your address. Like, can't you just do this on one form? Why do I have to do it this way? Or can't you send me to a website where I put this information in once and it puts it in multiple forms? But there's still people doing it this way. I will say we just did some work on a trust for my family. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed about that process is, yes, there's a lot of different forms. But when I walked through the process, I entered name, birthdays, addresses, that kind of stuff. And it used the information everywhere else in the process. I'm like, if a simple lawyer that's a one-man shop can do this, anybody can do it, right? So there's not just processes that cause you pain. There's processes that cause your customers pain, where they're saying, why are you asking me this again? Here's a good one. Have you ever called a customer service number? They ask you for your name, date of birth, your address, all that. They take a little bit of information from you and they say, oh, I'm going to transfer you to another department. And you get over to the other department and the first thing they ask you is name, date of birth, address, social security number. And you're like, I just gave that to somebody. Why am I doing that again? I could understand if you asked me one question to re-verify my identity because I got transferred, but asking me all of that over again, come on, there's got to be a better way to do it. It's not just things that cause you pain. It's things that cause your customers pain. So ask questions. The next one here is implement changes incrementally. So as you're going through this, don't change 10 processes all at once. Change 1 or 2 things and make 2 or 3 changes and then see how that works and then make some more changes. So make changes incrementally. That was number 3 on my list. Number 4 is review periodically. Let me go back to the barn door example. When we made the first big jump in that barn door thing where we cut the hole in the door and we started using the barn door, that served us for a period of time. It served us for probably the next year or 2, maybe longer, until we got to a point where we were big enough that we're like, hey, now it's causing other problems that it's here. Let's do the thing we've always wanted to do and cut a hole in the side of the building, put a ramp over there and move this process to around the side of the building because it sucks where it is, right? And that wound up being a permanent solution. The reason we changed is because we reviewed the process and decided we need to move it. And so when you're looking at your business, identify the pain points. That's the simple ones. Once you've identified the pain points, start questioning processes, implement changes incrementally, and then review periodically. If you do that, I guarantee you it's going to make your life much, much easier. Now, for the final little segment here, I want to go over a couple of tools that make my life easier, may help you in doing what you're doing. So here's a handful of tools. I'm going to go lightning fast through this because I'm already way over time that I put on myself for this podcast. So some of the tools, one of them is Stream Deck. I've got this little Stream Deck here right in front of me. You can't really see it. It's got a bunch of different buttons. So when I go to do a task on my computer, like the podcast, for example, instead of me clicking in 7 or 8 different windows to get to what I need to start recording, I have one button that I click and it automates opening all the windows that I need. If I need to open something else, instead of me going to programs or whatever and finding it or clicking on start, I've got my Evernote on a button. I just click the button. I've got my lighting on a button. I just click the button. Lights come on, lights go off. I've got little things inside of my Stream Deck for text. So if I'm on a webinar and I want to give my links to the podcast, the book, different things like that, I can just click in the little text area and I just hit the CTA button and it just populates that right out of the gate there. So it's really, really simple. I don't have to go look for it, copy it, paste it, all that kind of stuff. I've got a one-touch thing that I use on Stream Deck for that. Here's 2 more tools that I use for the podcast. One is called Descript. That allows us to do a lot of the editing. Descript is great for that. In some ways, it's got its issues, but all the tools do. But it's better than using some of the free tools that are out there. So the editing, the transcripts, all that kind of stuff, we do that through Descript. And it automatically does the transcript for us, which is one thing we really like. So that you don't have somebody typing it or anything like that. Then we use Riverside FM for recording. It streamlines a lot of the video pieces of it, the upload of the video and the syncing and all that kind of stuff. It does a way better job than Zoom or a lot of the other platforms. But there's other platforms that do the recording. When it comes to CRMs, I highly recommend HubSpot. I think that's a great one to use. HubSpot's a great tool. So you can go use HubSpot. There's a free level. I think that's a really good one. It integrates with a lot of things like your website and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to project management tools, Monday.com is great. Smartsheets are great. There's a lot of other project management tools. Some of them do more than just project management, but there's some really good tools on the market for that. And then a lot of folks that I know really like using SharePoint. There's a lot of different reasons. The document editing is probably one of their most favorite, but the organization in the cloud and the document editing is one of the really, really popular ones. So find the tools that make sense to you. Ask your colleagues about tools they're using for processes, and I guarantee you'll make your life much, much easier. I'll see you in the next episode. I really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast and screenshot it and tag me on LinkedIn or whatever social media you use. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.